Welcome back, Night Wanderer. Tonight, you're slipping quietly into a chapter of history they definitely forgot to teach in school. By the way, if you were actually there, you'd probably have been arrested, eaten badly preserved fish, or caught something unpleasant. But don't worry, tonight, you're only here in spirit. Before we set off, do that slow scroll to like and subscribe, but only if these sleepy little time loops are your thing. And tell me where in the world you're watching from, and what time your clock says. It's strangely comforting knowing who else is still up. Now, lights low, maybe grab a blanket or let your ceiling fan hum away in the background. Time to drift gently back, one step at a time. The darkness is the first thing you feel, not see. Feel. It wraps around you like damp fur. Not luxurious, brushed sable fur like the ones you'd sell. No, this is fur that smells faintly of mildew and wolf. Something that's been slept in, coughed into, bled on, for several winters, by you. You are, quite unfortunately, a fur trapper. And you are in Siberia. The century? Vaguely 17th or 18th. It honestly doesn't matter. Time here is less of a measurement and more of a haunting. The cold does not slap you awake. It does not nudge. It creeps, seeps, slithers into the marrow of your bones and settles there like a quiet, resentful guest. You can't remember the last time you weren't cold. You've had dreams of warmth. Yes, but even in those, you were still wearing at least 2 layers and chewing on a pine cone. You are lying on what generously might be called a bed. It is a wooden platform, unevenly hewn, layered with straw and fur, both of which now smell indistinguishably like moist, rotten musk gland. The blanket above you, another hide, probably elk, is stiff in places from old blood, not necessarily yours. Above you, the ceiling of your hut hangs low, carved into a slope from the earth and lined with logs. Cobwebs lace the beams. You can see your breath rising into them, slow clouds, one after another. You briefly imagine what the spiders must think of your breath fog. Perhaps they believe you are a broken steam engine. Perhaps they're writing a poem about you in spider language. Perhaps they plan to eat you when you finally die. Your right foot is asleep. Your left hand is suspiciously damp. You will not be investigating that yet. The silence is deep, but not comforting. There's no birdsong, no breeze, just the occasional creak of shifting timber and the faint crackle of ice forming inside your water bucket. You blink. Your eyelashes stick together slightly from the frost. Congratulations, you've just earned the icy mascara badge of Siberian survival. Very fashionable. You sit up, slowly. Every joint protests like a rusted hinge. Something pops in your spine. You are 90% wool, jerky, and stubbornness. Also, possibly worms. Intestinal guests are common here. They never help with chores. As your eyes adjust to the dim, you take in your surroundings. Your home, if such a word can be used for a glorified animal burrow, is about 8 paces wide and 4 paces deep. The floor is packed earth. The walls are logs, chinked with a mixture of moss and mud that has started to peel in corners like a bored scab. There's a crude shelf, sagging slightly, holding a metal cup, a tiny cracked mirror, a pipe with nothing left to smoke, and one button you've been meaning to sew back onto something since last September. It still hasn't happened. You're waiting for the button to make the first move. There is no window. Windows are for people with neighbors they trust, which you do not have, and who want sunlight, which you also do not want. Sunlight is a lie in this part of the world. It just reflects off snow and tricks you into frostbite. There is, however, a door, sort of. It's a wood plank jammed over the entry hole, weighed down with rocks, with a fur flap on the inside to keep out the wind. It rarely works. The wind here is ambitious. It enters through cracks, gaps, and sometimes what you are fairly certain are dimensional portals. In the far corner is your food bag, which currently contains a handful of dried mushrooms, possibly safe, a frozen hunk of reindeer fat, definitely not appetizing, and a biscuit so hard it could be used to shave iron. Beside it sits your best friend in this cruel world, your axe. The handle is wrapped in tattered linen for grip. The blade is nicked, slightly rusted, and like you, haunted by its own past mistakes. It leans against the wall like a tired roommate who also happens to be your only defense against bears, wolves, and the occasional hallucination. Speaking of hallucinations, your spoon, the one carved into a face with big eyes and a frown, is staring at you from the nightstand. You named him Ivan last week, or was it Pavel? Either way, he's judgmental but loyal. You rise. Slowly, your knees creak, your hips ache. You feel 70, even if you're barely past 30. Siberia does that to a person. You don't age here, you marinate. The fur hanging from the ceiling, drying, stiffening, quietly molting, rustles slightly. It could be the wind. Or it could be the marten you forgot to finish skinning. You make a mental note to check later. Or never. Either works. You shuffle toward your hearth, a loose term for a circle of stones and some soot, and nudge the ashes, cold, of course. You reach for the tinderbox. Your fingers are stiff and your thumbs cracked enough to store small secrets. You strike the flint. Once, twice, sparks. A glow. The faintest whisper of warmth begins to grow. You blow on it, carefully, lovingly, like encouraging a toddler to say their first word. Except the word here is fire, and it's the only thing standing between you and turning into a human icicle. As the fire finally catches, the glow lights up your hut in a flickering amber that makes the shadows dance. It's almost cozy, in a Stockholm Syndrome sort of way. You wrap your furs tighter around your shoulders, shuffle back to your stool, and sit. Outside, the trees creak, or groan, or whisper. You pretend not to notice. You breathe in and out. Watching the vapor drift, the fire crackles, the wind howls, your stomach growls, your spoon smiles, it's morning, and you are very much alive, unfortunately. Waking up in Siberia isn't so much an act of will as it is a grim contractual obligation you made with your own survival instincts. And much like any grim obligation, it comes with immediate consequences, like movement. The first thing you must do, and I use the word must loosely, in the same way one must eventually blink or acknowledge that frostbite exists, is relieve yourself. Now, in your more naive days, last autumn, you tried the going outside route. Open sky, howling wind, a sense of spiritual union with the suffering of your ancestors. That ended with your exposed rear end freezing to the bark of a pine stump and a philosophical realization that dignity, like warmth, is a social construct. So now, in winter, and let's be clear, winter here isn't a season, it's a setting, you use the chamber pot. The pot in question is a rusted iron thing that used to be part of a samovar, perhaps, before it was repurposed into its current noble role, collecting the steaming regrets of a man who lives alone in a hole. The ritual begins with locating said pot in the darkness. You grope around with your numb hands, praying you don't knock it over, and find the familiar icy rim. You mutter something between a prayer and a curse, probably both, in Old Church Slavonic, or just a noise. Once in position, you brace yourself, not just physically, emotionally, psychologically. The pot, being metal, is cold. Cold in a way that transcends science and enters the realm of theology. Cold that judges you. Cold that might genuinely contain a small, self-aware frost demon who resents being peed on. The moment itself is swift yet unforgettable. A rush, a sigh, a sharp, cruel contrast between inner heat and outer chill. And then, the sound, the unmistakable crackle of steaming liquid hitting ice. Yes, the pot was already frozen from the night before. You are, in essence, now urinating onto a small glacier. Congratulations, you are now officially part of the permafrost problem. You slide the pot aside. You will deal with it later. You won't. You wrap your furs tighter, as if apologizing to your own body. You whisper promises of soup and firewood that you know you cannot keep. Your next task is water, because your throat is dry, your lips are cracked, your breath smells like desperation, and your dreams were full of wells. Now, in a modern home, you might simply wander to the kitchen and turn a tap. In this timeline, however, that tap is a frozen bucket with a crust of ice thicker than your emotional resilience. And it's across the hut, near the door, where the wind sneaks in and makes everything somehow even colder. You shuffle to it. Each step is a betrayal of your joints. You poke the ice with a stick, it laughs. You poke harder, nothing. So, like a seasoned professional, you take your knife and begin to chip away, gently muttering something offensive in the direction of the sky. Eventually, a slush puddle emerges. You dip your cup into it. The metal bites your fingers. The water smells faintly of wood smoke and desperation, but you drink it anyway. It does not quench. It merely exists inside you, like a guest you didn't invite. At this point, the fire has remembered its duty and begun to sputter into something almost functional. The flames snap at the air like angry toddlers. You feed it a bit of bark, a sliver of birch resin, and one of your hopes for spring. It catches. You sit again, thawing one foot at a time under the meager warmth. You flex your toes. The left big toe has gone completely numb, which is either a problem for future you or a permanent relocation to toe purgatory. You scan the hut for your flint pouch. It's in your coat pocket, which is under your other coat, which is under your fox pelt blanket, which is on top of the marten you forgot to finish skinning. You retrieve it all, layer by layer, like a tragic onion. Once you've extracted your outerwear, the next phase begins, preparing to go outside. The phrase alone should fill you with dread. The cold out there doesn't care if you're dressed. It will peel the warmth from your bones one molecule at a time. But still, you must go. You have traps to check. If you're lucky, there might be something inside that isn't already partially consumed by a rival predator. If you're very lucky, it might even be dead already. But before all that, clothing. Socks, if they can be called that, come first. More fur than fabric, more holes than substance, they resemble the pelts of animals that died from embarrassment. You roll them onto your feet like a man wrapping wounds, which is essentially what you're doing. Then come the breeches, coarse, woolen, and still slightly damp from yesterday's snowmelt. You shudder as they embrace you with their itchy, judgmental snugness. Next, the tunic. It smells like fire and failure. You don't remember the last time it was washed, but you do remember the last time you tried. You broke through the river ice, screamed, and gave up. The tunic has not forgiven you. You layer over this a padded coat, then a fur-lined vest, then a scarf that once belonged to someone named Boris. You know this because it still has his name embroidered into it. You do not know what happened to Boris. You do not ask. Your boots are next. Stiff, cracked leather things that have absorbed more moisture than a regretful sponge. You hammer your feet into them with the force of a blacksmith sealing a coffin. Gloves? Optional. You have one. It is for your dominant hand. The other you simply curl into a ball inside your sleeve and pray that frostbite spares it out of pity. Hat? Of course. A fur trapper without a hat is just a lunatic in the woods. Yours is made of squirrel stitched together with sinew and prayer. It smells strongly of acorns. You wear it anyway. Fully cocooned in your layers of discomfort, you glance once more at the fire. It crackles weakly. You give it a solemn nod, like two coworkers acknowledging the mutual hell of the Monday shift. You approach the door, you lift the wooden bar, peel back the flap, and wham! The wind hits you like a drunk god with a grudge. It howls. It bites. It finds the microscopic crack between scarf and collar and slithers down your neck like a frozen serpent of malice. You push forward anyway, because this is Siberia. And you are awake, and somewhere out there, a squirrel might be making eye contact with one of your traps, which means it's time to begin your day. Let's talk about where you live, and I use live loosely in the same way a fungus lives under a damp log. It's not so much a home as it is an ongoing experiment in human stubbornness and organic decay. A hut? Technically. A shelter? Debatable. A shared coffin for one? Now we're getting closer. Your Siberian dwelling is a one-room cabin made entirely of logs, moss, wishful thinking, and the bitter knowledge that no one is coming to rescue you. The logs are uneven, hewn with an axe that was probably already blunt in the reign of Ivan the Terrible. They groan when the wind presses in, not in protest, but in resignation, like even they would leave if they could. The walls are insulated with mud, straw, and thick lumps of ice that formed from your breath and refuse to leave, like particularly clingy guests. Every crevice leaks a breeze, a whisper of the eternal cold. You've stuffed the gaps with animal hair and rags. It doesn't help. The wind finds you. It always finds you. The floor is compacted earth, laced with crumbs of old ash, beetle husks, and the faintest aroma of regret. It's not so much swept as negotiated with. You've tried to keep it tidy, but the moment you do, the snow melts in and the mice redecorate. So now you simply accept the crust of detritus as part of the aesthetic, a rustic, pestilential chic. There is a table. If by table, we mean a warped plank balanced on two stumps, stained with soot, blood, and the occasional boot print. You use it for everything: skinning, eating, repairing, praying, and contemplating the futility of it all. The only centerpiece is a lump of congealed fat in a clay bowl. You eat from it sometimes. You also burn it. It's multitasking at its saddest. Hygiene, meanwhile, is theoretical. Let's begin with your body. You haven't truly bathed since late summer. not counting the accidental dips into frozen streams while checking snares. Your skin is a patchwork of soot, dead flakes, and something that may or may not be lichen. You scratch often. You no longer question what flakes off. Your hair has formed its own union and now functions independently. It hangs in stiff ropes, smelling of wood smoke and disappointment. On some mornings it cracks when you move your head. It is less a style and more a texture experiment gone rogue. As for oral hygiene, yes, the teeth. You still have most of them, which makes you a minor miracle in this timeline. Brushing is accomplished by chewing spruce twigs and spitting into the fire, which sometimes responds with a hiss of judgment. Your breath is robust. It could wilt bark, but don't worry, you're rarely close enough to another human for this to matter. Your fingernails are black-rimmed, jagged, and excellent for removing splinters, small bones, or lice. Yes, the lice. You live with them now. In your clothes, in your hair, sometimes in your beard. They are your roommates. You even name them during the long nights. There's one on your collar called Gregory. He's getting too comfortable. Now, vermin. Let's start with rats. Large, smug, and unimpressed by your efforts to keep them out. You sometimes hear them squabbling in the rafters or scratching under the hearthstones. Once, one of them stared at you while you ate a turnip and you felt genuine shame. He had better posture than you. Fleas are more subtle but more persistent. You itch in places you forgot you had. They love the folds of your socks and the seams of your pants, and they seem to gain strength from your discomfort. You scratch until you bleed. The bleeding distracts from the cold. It's a kind of multitasking. And then there are the flies. Yes, even in winter. How? No one knows. They emerge in the brief warmth of your hut like tiny reincarnations of the plague, buzzing with purpose, landing on your food, your face, your open wounds. You slap them lazily. They return with friends. The hut smells of many things, most of them unpleasant. There's the ever-present perfume of damp fur. Add to that the tang of old blood, wet wood, urine. Let's not pretend it all made it into the pot, and something that can only be described as fermented loneliness. Occasionally, the wind wafts in fresh pine air. You treasure it. Briefly. Then it mixes with foot odor and dies a quick death. Your clothing hangs from nails on the wall. They are stiff, brownish-gray and resemble battle flags from a forgotten war. Occasionally, a moth drifts lazily past. You suspect they're not eating the cloth, just checking on your progress toward total decay. Your boots, when not being worn, that harbor their own ecosystem. Once you found a spider living comfortably inside one. You didn't evict it. You admired its determination. There's a mirror shard nailed above the hearth. You glance into it occasionally. What you see is not a man. It's an apparition of frost and soot, eyes sunken, lips cracked, with cheeks that haven't seen fat or joy in months. You nod solemnly to this figure. He nods back. He is your only consistent neighbor. Lighting, if you're lucky, comes from a greasy tallow candle stub or a smoky pinewood torch. Both emit just enough glow to confirm that yes, something in the corner did move, and no, you probably won't be able to sleep tonight. You sometimes talk to the hut. Not because you're mad, though that's debatable, but because the silence gets heavy. You apologize to the walls for the draft. You whisper apologies to the mice when you set traps. You thank the door when it opens without splintering. The door, of course, does not respond, but it understands. At night, as you lie in your pile of fur, listening to the wind howl like a banshee with indigestion, you sometimes imagine what it would be like to live somewhere warmer. With windows, soap, neighbors who bathe. But then the fire cracks, the lice settle, the rats finish arguing, and you slowly sink back into a half-sleep that smells faintly of bear grease and mold. And that is home. It begins, as all acts of survival do, with a whimper. Not your own, necessarily, more a gastric moan from deep within your abdomen. A twisting protest of emptiness, the kind of hunger that doesn't just gnaw politely, it files complaints directly with your brain. And this is how your day starts. Not with a sunrise, but with a stomach grumble that sounds suspiciously like a dying goat. You sit up in your damp, lumpy fur bed, which smells faintly of rancid fat, and that one time you tried to dry muskrat hides indoors, and take stock of your options. They are, as usual, grim. Option 1. The remains of a soup-like substance you left by the hearth last night. It has congealed into something between glue and philosophy. difficult to understand, harder to explain, and vaguely accusatory. You poke it, it quivers, you eat it anyway. Because in 17th century Siberia, food doesn't comfort, it challenges. You move toward your kitchen, which is not a kitchen in the modern sense. No countertop, no cutting board, no adorable ceramic jar labeled tea. Just a battered iron pot, a wooden ladle that has been chewed on, possibly by you, possibly by something with more legs, and a shelf held up by a prayer and a bent nail. On the shelf, 2 onions, soft, a strip of dried fish, accidentally rehydrated by cabin humidity, and something that may have once been a turnip, now hollowed out and inhabited by a beetle colony. You opt for the fish, you break it apart and smell it. Mistake. It smells like if regret had a seafood section. A sharp slap of ammonia hits your sinuses and tears pool in your eyes. This, apparently, is breakfast. You hold your breath and chew. It crunches in the middle. You do not ask why. Sometimes you have broth if you remembered to simmer bones in the hearth overnight. Bone broth in this era is both sustenance and punishment. It's made from whatever carcass remains from your last hunting attempt. Could be rabbit, could be squirrel, could be, let's call it, mystery fur. The broth is cloudy, greasy, and tastes faintly of ash, metal, and existential dread. It coats your tongue like a promise you didn't want made. Occasionally there's a lump. Sometimes it's edible, sometimes it's cartilage. Sometimes it's better left undefined. Salt is a luxury. You might have some, you might not. You might lick a sweaty rock and pretend. Spice? No. That's for nobles and people who don't live in buildings held together by moose, sinew, and depression. Bread is rare, but when it exists, it's not what you think. This isn't crusty, golden artisan fare. This is a gray, puck-like disc made from flour, bark shavings, and the faint hope of not dying. It's so dense that if you drop it, it leaves a mark in the earth. You chew it slowly. You chew everything slowly, not for pleasure, but because rushing causes pain, and your one good molar is currently busy holding down a filling made of pine resin. If you're lucky, breakfast includes porridge, a blend of oats or millet boiled into a sludge and flavored with whatever didn't rot yet. It has the texture of wet burlap and the color of moldy linen. It steams gently in the cold air, a sad little ghost of nutrition. You eat it hunched over the fire pit, spoon in one hand, the other scratching at something moving beneath your shirt. Your breath fogs the air like a dragon, if dragons were exhausted and underfed and smelled like they slept in their own boots. You don't talk during breakfast. Not that you could, unless you count muttering obscenities at the rat that stole your rind of cheese 2 nights ago. You saw him. You made eye contact. He knows. You sit on your haunches, chewing, not enjoying, just enduring. Outside, the wind howls like a banshee with an unpaid heating bill. Inside, you chew fish flakes and calculate whether there's enough dried mushroom left to stretch to dinner. Spoiler, probably not. Once you had eggs, bird eggs, gathered carefully from a low-hanging nest. You boiled them in soot-stained water and stared at them for several minutes before eating. Not out of reverence, but because they were the first food that hadn't tried to escape or ferment itself. On special days, which you determine entirely arbitrarily, like Thursdays or the day you didn't get frostbite, you add rendered animal fat to your breakfast. It tastes like meat dreams and candle wax. It makes your lips slick and your stomach slightly calmer, like tucking a napkin into your soul. This, for a Siberian fur trapper, qualifies as luxury. Tea exists, sort of. A bitter brew made from boiled pine needles or dried herbs you don't remember naming. You sip it from a cracked wooden cup, the liquid scalding your tongue but warming your hands. You pretend it's pleasant. You pretend a lot of things now. Sometimes, food is a memory. You think of bread ovens, of cheese wheels, of roast goose and pickled herring and dumplings fat with warmth. These are not things you have. These are stories your stomach tells your brain before sleep. Little edible lies. But mostly, breakfast is survival. You eat the least offensive thing. You chew until it softens. You swallow, you scratch, you sigh, and then you stare into the fire and wonder if, just maybe, you could catch that squirrel that's been watching you from the eaves with barely concealed contempt. You finish the broth. There's a hair in it, yours, probably. You eat it anyway. You would think, being in Siberia, where winter stretches from September to May and the frost casually commits war crimes on your skin, that getting dressed would involve luxury. plush furs, layered garments, some elegant process of cozy assembly. You would be wrong. Getting dressed, in your case, is not an event. It's an ordeal. A negotiation with fibers and frostbite. And if you're lucky, the lice have left you enough fabric to pretend modesty. You begin with what you slept in, which in fairness is also what you wore yesterday, and the day before, and possibly the day you got here. These are not pajamas. These are survival crusts. A wool shirt the color of despair, coarse enough to sand wood, stiffened with weeks, no months of sweat, blood, smoke, and the unrelenting intimacy of bodily leakage. Taking it off would be worse than leaving it on. Taking it off would mean exposing your skin to air. Real air. Siberian air. Air that freezes your nose hair while simultaneously whispering regrets into your soul. So you don't undress. You layer. Your underclothes are a loose suggestion. Woven linen, if you're blessed. Frayed wool, if you're not. It chafes in all the wrong places and warms all the wrong parts. You scratch, wince, and then pull on your trousers, stiff, matted wool breeches that could stand up without you in them. They resist your legs. They resent being legs clothing. Next comes the tunic. It is thick and brown and smells faintly of mold, like a wet dog who's seen too much. The seams are holding on with faith. The collar is torn. You call it fashion. Then, the boots, or rather the objects you shove your feet into and pray. These are not boots like we imagine them. No sleek leather, no ergonomic soles, no cozy fleece interior. These are slabs of reindeer hide, stitched with gut string and cursed by time. You jam your foot into one. It crunches. You pause. Something shifts inside. You ignore it. Your toes curl around straw. That's your lining. Straw and possibly a mouse. The mouse is warm. You share the space. Next, your overcoat, the pièce de résistance. A hulking fur monstrosity sewn from the pelts of animals you either hunted yourself or scavenged off other, less fortunate trappers. It drapes around your body like an exhausted bear. It smells like death, but it holds in the heat and most of the fleas. Sometimes there's a sash, usually a rope. You tie it around your waist, not for fashion, but to remind yourself you still have a shape underneath all this punishment. Now, the hat, an iconic piece of trapper attire. Technically a fur cap, though after this many seasons, it resembles a very angry mushroom. It's lined with squirrel, patched with rat, and has two ear flaps that hang like the drooping wings of a dying bird. You tie them under your chin. Too tight, always too tight. You are now dressed. Or rather, you are buried. You waddle like a man entombed. You cannot bend. You cannot sit easily. You cannot remove any single item of clothing without unleashing a swarm of biting passengers into the room. You are clothing now. You are warmth's prisoner. And none of this is waterproof, not one stitch. Snow melts on you, refreezes on you, becomes ice on you. You are a walking glacier of regret. Let's not forget the accessories. A belt knife, rusted, dull, but still a symbol of status. A leather pouch filled with flint, mushrooms, and desperation. A cross pendant if you're religious, and you are. Fear will do that. Gloves, if you have them, are mismatched. One made of wool, the other fur. One has a hole, the other has no fingers. You wear both anyway. And over it all, the cloak. A beastly wrap of elk hide and mystery fibers that billows in the wind like the wings of someone about to die. It's heavy, stinks of tallow, and drags in the snow. But it's your best defense against frostbite. Well, that and denial. Everything scratches, everything sags, everything smells. Your movement is limited, your dignity, non-existent. But hey, you're warm. Almost. The wind still finds seams, it still licks your neck with icy tongues. Your knees ache, your back screams. Your armpits are a jungle of rot and sweat. And yet, you consider yourself ready. Except now, you have to relieve yourself. And that means unlayering. Welcome to the trapper's paradox. To preserve your life, you must wrap yourself in a cocoon of filth and fabric. But to function, to move, to squat, to breathe, you must risk exposure. And that exposure could kill you. You shuffle to the door, you open it. Snow stings your face. The cold enters your sleeves like a burglar. Your nose freezes. You consider turning back. But nature does not negotiate. You go outside. You drop your pants. You make peace with death. Getting dressed, you realize, wasn't the hard part. It's everything after. You waddle back inside, relayer, retighten, readjust. The boots fight you. The belt is now twisted. The hat has rotated 45 degrees. You don't fix it. This is what fashion looks like in Siberia. Misery, creatively arranged. And with that, You are fully clothed, barely warm, slightly itchy, and almost ready to start your day. Almost. You forgot your mittens, they were under the squirrel. There is no work-life balance here. There is only work-death teetering. And today, like every day, your profession is painfully necessary and widely hated. You're a fur trapper in 17th century Siberia, which sounds almost romantic if you've never tried it. The truth is, you are a glorified pest control agent operating in sub-zero purgatory for barely enough pay to keep you in moldy bread and crusty wool. Your labor begins not with a choice, but with a cough. A dry, hacking cough, the kind that echoes against the icy beams of your hut like a prophecy. You're already dressed, if swaddled in expired animal parts counts. So you grab your gear, a sack, a few rusty steel traps, a knife duller than your last conversation, and a coil of frayed rope that might also be holding your entire emotional state together. Then it's time to head out. Into the snow. Always the snow. An endless canvas of cold, flat dread. The trees wear frost like funeral veils. The sky is gray and low, like it's trying to crush you with mood. Every step is a betrayal. Snow gives way just enough to make walking effortful, but never enough to stop filling your boots with damp ice slush. It seeps through your straw lining and kisses your toes like a slow curse. Your job today is simple. Check your traps. Except your traps are scattered across an area roughly the size of an existential crisis. They're not color-coded. There is no GPS. There are no trail markers. You remember their locations the way you remember dreams, vaguely, incorrectly, and with the creeping suspicion that something is watching you. It's usually a squirrel. Your first trap is empty. The second has a rabbit, well, part of one. Something else got there first. The rabbit's head is intact, staring blankly into eternity, as if to say, "You're not the only one suffering, friend." You sigh, or try to. The moisture freezes mid-exhale. You clear the snow from the trap, rebait it with the last sliver of dried fish, and move on. The next trap is sprung, but empty. The next has a sable, jackpot. These sleek little creatures are the whole reason you're out here ruining your knees and risking frostbite on your earlobes. You yank it from the trap. It's still warm. You mumble a prayer, not because you're pious, but because you need something to talk to besides the wind. It's time to skin it. Right here, in the cold, with your shaking, stiff fingers and a blade with the edge of a buttered spoon. The process is meditative, in the way that peeling wallpaper while crying is meditative. You make slow progress. Your fingertips bleed. The wind howls. The sable at least is quiet. By midday, you've collected 2 full pelts, 1 mangled corpse, and a bite on your hand from something that was definitely dead. You eat lunch, which is ambitious, because lunch is just a chunk of frozen rye bread you've been warming in your armpit. It's hard enough to shatter your teeth, but you chew anyway, jaw screaming in protest. You eat because you must. You eat because the alternative is passing out mid-skinning and becoming something else's lunch. Sometimes you talk to the trees. They don't talk back, which is disappointing, but also merciful. You name them. That one's Ivan. That one's disappointment. That one, the bent one, is your friend now. You lean on it to stretch your back and whisper your regrets into its bark. It accepts them with stoic silence. You continue your route. More traps, more disappointments. 1 large print in the snow, not yours, not rabbit, not encouraging. You tighten your grip on your knife and try not to think about how many trappers go missing every winter. Bears, wolves, rival trappers? No one really investigates. You just become a cautionary tale, and if they find your sled, a clearance sale. You check a snare and find a squirrel, a small one. It barely qualifies as a pelt, more like a suggestion of fur. You consider eating it raw. You're not that desperate, yet. By late afternoon, your sack is heavy with skins. Your arms ache. Your knees click like broken marionettes. You are hungry, cold, and emotionally hollowed out like a pumpkin in November. Still, you keep going. Because you need just a few more pelts to make quota, or to afford a new pair of gloves, or to pay the local tax collector so he doesn't accidentally burn your hut down this year. Motivation comes in strange forms. You reach the last trap just as the sun begins to lose interest in the horizon. It's beautiful in a cruel way. The snow turns gold, then pink, then gray again, like someone tried to paint the world warm and gave up halfway through. The last trap holds a fox, alive, injured. It snarls at you, eyes wide with pain and fury. Its leg is mangled. You kneel slowly, voice low, cooing nonsense in hopes it'll calm down. It doesn't. You pull out your knife. You hesitate. You weren't prepared for this part. No one is. You end it quickly. You skin it slower. Then you cry. Or you would if crying weren't a luxury the cold won't allow. Your tears would freeze before they even got the chance to express emotional depth. So you snort, wipe your nose on your sleeve, and tell yourself you'll feel better tomorrow. You won't. The walk home is darker, colder, more uncertain. Every tree looks like a threat. Every crunch of snow could be a predator. You sing to yourself, a tune you barely remember. It's off-key, but it keeps the dread company. By the time you reach your hut, it's nearly night. You unload your sack, you hang the pelts, you stretch your aching back and let out a sound that could be a groan or possibly a prayer for death. Tomorrow you will do this all again, unless a bear finds you first. Congratulations, you're sick. Maybe it was the raw squirrel you pretended not to consider. Maybe it was that fox bite, which you absolutely did not clean because cleaning implies both water and the vague hope of antiseptic. And let's be honest, your current medical regimen mostly consists of prayer, fermented garlic, and the occasional scream. The symptoms began subtly: a scratchy throat, a bit of dizziness, some chills, which was confusing because chills is the name of the weather all the time here. But now it's worse. Your joints ache in ways that feel personal. Your forehead is slick with sweat despite the fact that you could hang meat indoors. You are, in every sense, unwell. So, what do? Well, you could die quietly in your hut. That's an option. Or, and this is marginally worse, you could seek help from the local healer. She's called a znakharka, which sounds mystical, but really just means person who has seen a lot of plants and is willing to experiment. She lives 2 sled rides away in a crooked house that smells like smoked fish and unresolved trauma. You arrive, wheezing, clutching your ribs like they're trying to escape. The znakharka opens the door and peers at you like you're a puzzle she never wanted to solve. She's wrapped in 17 layers of wool and maybe 1 layer of sentience. Her eyes are sharp, too sharp. You describe your symptoms. She nods sagely. It's the spleen, she says. You're not sure what a spleen does. Neither is she, but she's convinced yours is being haunted. Diagnosis complete. She invites you in. The interior is what happens when superstition meets interior decorating. Animal bones hang from the rafters. Dried herbs cover every surface like itchy wallpaper. There's a jar on the shelf labeled goat phlegm, and you sincerely hope that's a joke. It isn't. She begins treatment. First, smoke. She burns a clump of something that smells like moldy sage and human regret. The air thickens. Your lungs protest. She waves the smoke around you with a feather that may or may not be from a species that still exists. Second, bleeding. Yes, we're doing that. She pulls out a small knife, dull of course, because why not make it poetic, and slices your arm. Not deeply, just enough to make you wonder whether dying in your hut would have been more dignified. Blood dribbles down your wrist into a carved wooden bowl. The illness flows out, she whispers. You're not sure. It mostly feels like your strength is flowing out, along with your will to live. Third, ingestion. She prepares a concoction. You watch, horrified, as she mashes dried berries, powdered mushroom, and what you're 90% sure is bear fat into a slimy paste. She stirs it with a stick that doubles as a stirring rod and a pointing stick for spiritual scolding. Then she hands it to you. You drink it. Of course you do. You've come this far. It tastes like compost, despair, and a whisper of mint. Now comes the waiting. You're told to lie down on a mat made from woven bark and fox hair. The ceiling drips slowly from years of stored condensation. In one corner, a squirrel skull grins at you. You drift in and out of fever-drenched hallucinations. Sometimes you're in a forest. Sometimes you are the forest. Once, a birch tree tells you to pay your debts. At some point, the znakharka checks your pulse and announces you'll probably survive. You're not sure whether that's good news. She sends you home with a pouch of dried mushrooms and a handful of goose feathers for balance. You limp back to your hut and collapse. But we're not done. A few days later, you wake up with an abscess on your leg, possibly from that infected cut, possibly from your general life choices. It's hot, swollen, and full of mysterious regret. Now, you could go back to the znakharka, or you could let your friend Piotr handle it. He's not a doctor, Nobody is, but he owns a knife and a bottle of something vaguely flammable, and in Siberia that qualifies you for minor surgery. Pyotr arrives. He's drunk. But that's good. He insists you drink too. Numbs the pain, he says, pouring something into a wooden cup that smells like fermented axle grease and dead bees. You chug it. Your throat burns. Your brain slows. You lie back, staring at the ceiling, which now swirls gently like a very boring dream. Pyotr heats the knife in your stove. He presses it against the abscess. There are no words for this pain. Only a high-pitched whine that might be yours, or might be the ghosts of every animal you've ever skinned. The smell is worse. Boiling pus and burnt hair and fear. Pyotr hums a folk song to drown it out. Then he bandages you with a strip of linen so yellowed it might be older than both of you. He pats your leg and says, "You'll live." You're not sure you want to. Recovery takes weeks. There are no antibiotics, no follow-up visits, no gentle check-ins. Only you, a fever, a bottle of potato-based regret, and the vague hope that your immune system remembers its job. But eventually, you get better. Or not. You're never really sure. There's always something else. A cough, a boil, a weird rash that spells out Cyrillic letters if you stare too long. Every twinge feels fatal. Every sneeze, a potential death sentence. But you endure, because that's what fur trappers do. They trap, they bleed, they hallucinate, and they endure. Just remember, in this world, health is not a state. It's a negotiation. You wake to the gurgling protest of your stomach. A sound like a boiling frog trying to reason with a thunderstorm. It's not hunger, exactly. Hunger was 3 days ago. This is something else entirely. Something primal, something hollow and echoing, like a church bell rung in an abandoned stomach-shaped cathedral. It's time to eat, sort of. You peer into the corner where you store your provisions. That's what you call the icy wooden crate and 2 dangling burlap sacks. Because calling it the shrine to edible despair doesn't quite roll off the tongue. Inside, a half-frozen lump of salted fish, 2 potatoes that have grown more eyes than your nightmares, a slab of something that was probably meat once, species uncertain, and, your pride and joy, a hard crust of bread that now serves dual purpose as emergency rations and a weapon. You select the fish, or rather, the fish selects you by falling over when you breathe near it. Its aroma is complicated, like if despair and seawater had a baby and left it in a smokehouse for 6 months. You chip off a piece with your knife, which squeals in protest. You chew, slowly, bravely. The texture is that of parchment soaked in brine, and the flavor is less taste and more memory of the sea filtered through a raccoon's digestive system. You eat anyway. Because in 17th century Siberia, food doesn't nourish. It interrogates. Some mornings, if you're lucky, you'll have soup. And by soup, we mean a liquid vaguely associated with flavor created by boiling bones until they give up. If you're really lucky, the bones came from something you killed yourself. If not, well, there's always found meat. We don't ask questions about found meat. It's better that way. You chop up one of the potatoes. It's gone slightly green, which, in modern times, would prompt warnings about solanine poisoning and a call to poison control. Here, it just means a little extra tang. Into the pot it goes. You add some dried herbs, not because they help, but because they distract you for 5 seconds from the fact that your meal smells like something that washed ashore and developed opinions. Then the bread. This is less food, more tool. It's so hard it could break teeth, which is ironic because you're already missing 2. You soak it in the soup until it becomes soft enough to not crack a molar. Barely. You chew. It tastes like sorrow and splinters. Meanwhile, outside, Pyotr is gnawing on boiled leather. Literally. That old belt from last winter? It's dinner now. Boil it long enough and it becomes chewable, not enjoyable, not nutritious, just slightly less deadly than starvation. He waves at you with a grin missing so many teeth it looks like a picket fence after a bear attack. Speaking of bears, sometimes one is the meal. If you're fortunate enough to bring one down and survive, the meat feeds you for weeks, but it spoils fast. So you salt it, smoke it, dry it, bury it in snow, and still it somehow turns rancid faster than your self-esteem. You eat it anyway. You cut around the green parts and convince yourself the rest is fine. If it smells like regret and tastes like kerosene, you just chew faster and don't think about it. Preservation is an art form, and by art we mean witchcraft. Smoking huts turn meat into jerky, so hard you could shingle your roof with it. Salting draws out so much moisture it mummifies the food, and you, if you stand too close. Fermentation is popular. Root vegetables bubbling in brine until they become both food and a fun science experiment. You scoop some out and marvel at how cabbage can smell simultaneously like old socks and triumph. In rare moments of opulence, you find mushrooms, foraged carefully because some will kill you instantly and others just give you prophetic dreams about talking snow and dancing livers. You take the risk. A little hallucination is worth the iron. And then there are the famine foods, the ones nobody speaks of until they have to. Bark, grass roots, tree moss, boiled until it becomes a slurry of fibrous sadness. Some claim to eat reindeer lichen, others claim those people died trying. In worst-case scenarios, there's rumor of cannibalism. Always a friend of a friend, always whispered, always followed by uncomfortable silence and long stares into the fire. Tonight's dinner is simpler. You have a bit of venison left, dry, tough, aggressively fibrous. You slice it thin and fry it in bear fat until it's just shy of inedible. The fire crackles, and for a brief moment, your hut smells almost inviting. Until you realize the bear fat has gone rancid and is now releasing a stench that could summon ghosts. You eat anyway, not because it tastes good, but because not eating is worse. As you chew, you think about scurvy. Not romantically, of course, but it's a constant thought. That lack of fresh vegetables, it's not just an inconvenience. It's a slow, inevitable death sentence. Your gums already bleed when you smile. Your joints ache for no reason. You once dreamed your teeth fell out like pine cones. That's not just symbolism, that's foreshadowing. And yet, this is survival. Every meal a gamble. Every bite a test of resilience. Every plate, and we use the term plate generously, a reminder that you are alive just enough to regret it. You finish the meal in silence. Pyotr farts loudly outside. You smile, not because it's funny, but because it's proof someone else is still alive. Tomorrow, you'll do it again. You'll wake up, pick something vaguely edible off your wall or floor, and consume it with grim determination. Because in this place, food is never comfort. It's confrontation. You eat to suffer, and you suffer to eat. By now, your stomach has settled into a gentle boil of salted dread, and the last threads of light have begun unraveling across the Siberian sky. This is when the real guardians of the land take over. Not soldiers, not priests, but stories. And in Siberia, the stories are watching you. Always. See, in a land this cold, this remote, and this frankly indifferent to your existence, belief becomes a survival instinct. The church? Yes, of course. Officially, you're an Orthodox Christian. You cross yourself before meals, you whisper prayers before sleep, and you nod respectfully when the priest rides into the nearest settlement twice a year to remind everyone that God sees all. But God, distant and glacial like the tundra itself, is not your most immediate concern. No, your primary spiritual advisors are the fire, the trees, and that one squirrel that always seems to be staring at you with the eyes of a tax collector. You throw another log onto the stove and murmur a blessing, not a biblical one, something older. You don't quite remember where you learned it, only that your grandmother used to mutter the same phrase before lighting candles or passing near the woods alone. Something about keeping the leshy asleep. Ah yes, the leshy, the forest spirit. Tall as the trees, shaggy like a bear in a bad mood, and easily offended by everything from whistling to spilling salt. No one has ever quite seen the leshy, but everyone's uncle's cousin's neighbor has, which is close enough. You leave offerings, bread crusts, scraps of meat, sometimes a shiny button if you're feeling fancy. Not because you believe in him, of course, but just in case. Because out here, just in case is the national religion. The moon rises, bloated and yellow like an overripe eye, and you pause. Not to admire the beauty. You never admire the moon. The moon is not your friend. It changes too much. The full moon means the dead might rise. The new moon? Time to hide your sharp tools and avoid saying your name out loud after dark. Everyone knows someone who cut wood on a moonless night and found himself haunted by a headless dog with his grandfather's voice. You think about whistling. You enjoy a good whistle, maybe a Johnny tune to ease the loneliness, but stop yourself. Whistling calls the devil, and even if you don't believe that, you remember the time Pyotr whistled while skinning a rabbit and immediately cut his thumb down to the bone. Coincidence? Sure. But coincidences get you killed out here. You make the sign of the cross. Then, for good measure, you toss a pinch of salt over your shoulder and whisper an apology to the wind. Now that the spiritual security system is in place, you can enjoy some casual paranoia. Neighbors don't trust each other. Why would they? Trust is dangerous. It makes you soft. And in the great Soviet precursor known as whatever this place is, soft means dead. So everyone watches everyone else. You know who's been feeding their dog a little too well during a famine. You know whose child didn't get sick when the others did. You know who leaves little carvings on the trees near the outhouse. Odd little runes that look suspiciously like protective charms. But you say nothing. Because you have your own superstitions too. You tuck your boots under your bed, left over, right. Always. If you do it the other way around, you'll dream of wolves. And if you dream of wolves, someone you know will die. Again, probably coincidence. But why risk it? Your grandmother once told you to never sleep with your feet facing the door. That's how corpses are laid out. You didn't listen once, and you woke up with frostbite and a dead bird on your doorstep. Not doing that again. And then there are the prayers. Not the long, churchy ones. Nobody has time for those. Short ones. Whispered ones. Like spells, except not technically heresy. A string of syllables, half-remembered, mumbled into your coat as you walk past the hollow tree where Ivan claimed to see eyes. Not a pair of eyes. Just eyes. Floating. Do you believe him? Of course not. But you haven't walked past that tree since. And then there are the witches. They live on the edge of the settlement. Old women with bad backs, too many cats, and a knack for growing herbs that cure things modern men prefer to leave to gangrene. Officially, they're just healers. Unofficially, they know things. They see things. You once watched one stare at a pot of boiling nettles and mutter, "He won't survive the thaw." 3 weeks later, Stepan fell through the ice. Coincidence? Maybe. Maybe not. The church does its best to keep things civil. It holds festivals, baptisms, weddings. It sprinkles holy water liberally, like a spiritual Febreze. But out here, the priests are too few, the winter's too long, and the story's too good. Religion isn't something you attend. It's something you live in constant, shivering deference to. You hear a knock at your door. It's not a friendly knock. It's a maybe you sinned knock. You open it slowly. 2 neighbors, stern faces. They heard you threw away a piece of bread yesterday. Waste is a sin. Blasphemy even. Especially during a time like this. You apologize. They nod stiffly. They leave. Later you will leave an offering at the edge of the woods. Not for the neighbors, for the things that watch the neighbors. Because spiteful spirits don't just haunt the wicked, they haunt the careless. And you, friend, have been very careless. You blow out your candle with a breath that carries more fear than flame. You whisper a final prayer, one you made up years ago but still believe might work if said in the right tone. You close your eyes, and outside, the trees creak in agreement. Now that you've narrowly avoided being cursed by every sentient pinecone in the Siberian forest, it's time to reward yourself with fun. Or, more accurately, the 17th century Siberian version of fun, which exists on a spectrum somewhere between mildly painful and legally concerning. Leisure, as you might imagine, is not exactly prioritized out here. There's no weekend, no concept of me time, and certainly no soothing bubble baths. Closest thing would be a vat of birch tar, which exfoliates you right down to the bone. No, here in the frozen guts of empire, fun has to be pried out of the snow with your bare hands, and it often bites back. Let's start with the cornerstone of all peasant recreation, vodka. It's not the clean, clear, smooth sipping affair you're picturing from modern commercials. No misty glass with condensation, no whispered promises of triple distilled purity. This is more like boot sweat and regret in a jug. A cloudy, acrid brew that burns with the fury of 1,000 bad decisions. And you drink it anyway. Why? Because it's liquid courage, liquid warmth, and, occasionally, liquid fuel for your sled. You're not sipping it by a fireplace. You're throwing it back beside a pig bin while a man named Alexei challenges a goat to a staring contest. And you're losing. To the goat. Social events tend to happen in clusters. Weddings, funerals, feast days, and the occasional spontaneous brawl at the communal well. These moments of togetherness are less about merriment and more about mutual endurance. Weddings are massive, often multi-day ordeals involving loud music, animal sacrifices, and a lot of watching people try to dance in felt boots on icy mud. If you're lucky, there will be a bear, not as a guest, as entertainment. You'll watch three very drunk men attempt to wrestle it. Spoiler, they do not win. Festivals? Oh, yes. Russia is full of them. Religious and seasonal, with names like Maslenitsa, where you say farewell to winter by eating pancakes and ritually burning a straw effigy, presumably in hopes the sun gets the memo and returns. But here in the Siberian fringe, local traditions take on a more rustic tone, like the Great Turnip Festival. Is there a giant turnip? Yes. Does it have religious significance? Unclear. Does it get paraded through town on a sled pulled by children while old women throw cabbage at it? Absolutely. Does everyone cheer? Yes, but mostly because it's followed by a vodka drinking contest, and the loser has to sleep in the snow with the town goose. Again, and don't get too rowdy, because leisure here comes with rules. Break them, and you'll become the next main event. You see, justice in 17th century Siberia is swift, public, and deeply theatrical. Let's say someone steals a goat. That goat had a name. That goat had dreams. That goat is now gone. The penalty? A trial, usually more of a shouting match overseen by a beard with a man attached. Then, punishment. If you're lucky, it's a fine. If you're less lucky, it's a whipping, right there in the town square. Whipped with birch rods until your back looks like a poorly tilled field. You might even be tied to a post while the villagers come and mutter vague curses at you. This is known as a moral corrective. It's also known as a great way to ruin a date night. And if you're unlucky, truly spectacularly unlucky, you could be exiled further into the wilderness. Yes, banished from Siberia into deeper Siberia. It's like being told you're too dirty for the latrine and must now live inside it. Execution? Rare but dramatic. Hangings, beheadings, even the occasional left outside for the wolves approach, which doubles as entertainment for the kids. You try not to think about that as you wander toward the evening's distraction, storytelling. Gathered around the stove, everyone takes turns telling tales. Some are family legends. Some are obvious lies. Some are allegedly first-hand accounts of what happened the night the moon turned red and the fish sang. You sit and listen because it's warm, because it's human, and because you want desperately to believe that stories, unlike bears, don't bite. The children fall asleep curled beside dogs. The elders nod off, still muttering warnings about stepping over thresholds with your left foot first. Someone snores. Someone else farts. The stove crackles. Outside, snow falls like silence. You allow yourself a small, reluctant smile, because in this moment, brief and brittle as a frozen eyelash, you are not skinning something, you are not starving, and you are not being accused of witchcraft. You are just a body among other bodies, sharing heat and hallucinations. But don't get too comfortable. Tomorrow is tax day, and here, taxes can mean anything from fur to firewood to the third best of your 5 remaining teeth. By now, you've survived frostbite, a brush with drunken bear wrestlers, and a storytelling circle where one of the grandmothers definitely put a curse on your eyebrows. So surely, dear listener, you've earned a little affection. A flicker of romance, perhaps. A tender glance across the stew pot. A hand gently reaching for yours under the communal lice comb. But no, you are in 17th century Siberia, and love here is less Romeo and Juliet, more who's still alive and not a blood relative. Let's begin with the basics. There is no Tinder. There are no candlelit dinners unless you count that one time someone dropped a tallow candle into a bowl of boiled reindeer foot and called it soup. There is only proximity and the constant grinding pressure to produce more humans who can maybe survive long enough to haul firewood and pay taxes in squirrel pelts. You do not fall in love. You trip into marriage, usually because someone's aunt thought it would stop you from stealing all the turnips. Let's paint the scene. You're around the village stove again, thawing out your extremities and trying not to think about the fact that the smoke above your head is technically also cooking your neighbor's boots. Someone's babushka is whispering about your age, too old to be single, too young to be a widow, dangerously close to being considered feral. And that's when a suitor appears. He's got most of his teeth. He owns an axe. His fur hat smells like fermented goat, but he swears it's intentional. You're intrigued. His name is Ivan. So is everyone else's. Courtship begins the way all true romance should, with an offer of salted fish and awkward grunting. If you accept, you're expected to nod once, say nothing, and accept that you are now spoken for. The term consent is about 3 centuries and a continent away. There's no flirting, no poetry, no anxious waiting by the door for a love letter. What there is, however, is the dowry. That's right, you come with accessories. Your parents, or surviving parental figure, or the local strong woman who has adopted you after your real family froze to death, must offer up goods in exchange for someone agreeing to take you on. These goods can include a pig, if you're wealthy, several lengths of hand-woven wool, if you're practical, or a live chicken with a limp, if you're out of options. The limp makes it humble. People respect that. If the dowry is accepted, congratulations. You're getting married. The wedding is held on a Tuesday because the priest has a goat blessing on Wednesday and a funeral on Thursday, and Friday is for drinking away regrets. You'll be married in a wooden church which smells of candle wax, mildew, and the haunting scent of last week's exorcism. The ceremony is brief. There is bread, there is salt, there is vodka. The priest mumbles something about union and obedience, while you both stare at each other like 2 rabbits trying to figure out who's going in the stew first. Afterward, there's a feast. If you're lucky, the bread is soft. If you're unlucky, there's dancing. A herky-jerky, knee-bending affair that resembles cardio punishment more than celebration. Guests drink until they can't tell the difference between your cousin and your new spouse. This will matter less over time. And then, the wedding night. Let's not linger too long here. It's cold. There's no privacy. Your bed is a pile of straw with a blanket made from stitched-together squirrel pelts, and one pillow that smells like old shoes and guilt. You try to summon romance, but the smell of turnip-based body odor and someone's lingering chest infection makes it difficult. Still, you do your duty, because if you don't, someone's great-aunt will come in with a stick and ask why there's no baby yet. Speaking of babies, marriage here is not about companionship, it's about production. Babies are currency. You make them, you raise them barely, and you hope at least one survives the winter and learns how to chop wood before their teeth fall out from scurvy. There is no parenting manual. There is only instinct, the occasional folk tale about child-devouring forest spirits, and the general sense that if the child can walk, they can carry something. Love? Maybe. You might grow to tolerate each other. You might even enjoy your spouse's stories, or their soup, or the way they don't snore. But mostly, you survive together. Through cholera, famine, religious purges, and that time your neighbor set fire to your outhouse because he thought it was a demon. And if your spouse dies, as many do, you're expected to remarry. Quickly, efficiently, with as little emotion as possible. Because in Siberia, affection is a luxury. Attachment is dangerous. And no one has time to pine away when there's a bear trying to steal your smoked fish reserves. Still, on a quiet night, with the stove crackling and the snow outside swallowing the world in silence, you might catch your spouse's eye across the room and share a tired, lopsided smile. It's not passion, but it's something like peace, until the goat farts again. Ah, children, sweet, innocent bundles of joy. Bright-eyed wonders whose laughter could melt the iciest heart. That is, of course, unless you are living in 17th century Siberia. In which case your child is likely covered in soot, feral around the eyes, and currently chewing on a leather strap because you ran out of porridge 2 days ago. Let us gently disabuse ourselves of the idea of childhood as a protected, joyful time of exploration. That concept, like central heating, will not exist for another few hundred years, and even then, it'll be patchy at best. In this time and place, a child is essentially a smaller adult with worse coordination, shorter legs, and zero immunity to the plague. You're born, you squall, you are swaddled in something scratchy and questionably clean, and then within what feels like 20 minutes, you are expected to carry water, chop kindling, and avoid bears. There is no daycare. Your caretakers are the whims of nature, the distracted shouts of your older siblings, and possibly an angry goose who nests in the rafters and occasionally disciplines the toddlers. If you're lucky, your parents are still alive. If you're really lucky, they're sober and didn't trade you for a barrel of salt during the last famine scare. But even in the best circumstances, your existence is a delicate tightrope walk between adorable and helpful and useless and loud. You begin your duties early. At age 3, you're sent to sweep the floor with a birch branch that is frankly taller than you. At age 4, you are expected to know which mushrooms will kill you, which will hallucinate you into talking to icicles, and which you can actually eat. This is called natural selection. At 5, you are tending fires, feeding animals, and absorbing a constant, muttered stream of curses about frostbite and taxation. Your toys? Sticks, rocks, the occasional carved figurine if someone in the village has time and enough fingers left. Maybe a ball made of sewn-together animal bladders filled with dried peas. If you're wondering what that smells like, please don't. Schooling? Well, that depends. If your community has a church or a traveling priest, you might be taught to read just enough Cyrillic to sound out the Book of Psalms and misinterpret it in truly fascinating ways. But literacy is reserved for the very lucky or the very pious, or let's be honest, the boys. Girls are expected to learn embroidery, midwifery, and how to pour vodka without spilling it on the icons. The rest of your education comes through trial, error, and watching your uncle get kicked by a moose while trying to impress someone. Clothing for children is a bit of a gamble. You are, at all times, somewhere between growing into your clothes or having already outgrown them. Garments are patched endlessly, handed down through generations, and mostly consist of wool, linen, and the faint odor of goat urine. You do not get shoes until you've proven you won't lose them in the river. Mittens are earned. Scarves are spiritual. Discipline is direct. Crying gets you a sharp glance. Whining earns you a chore. And tantrums, those are handled by being plopped into a snowbank until you cool off, both literally and emotionally. But despite it all, despite the hardship and the cold and the absence of Play-Doh or cartoon educational programming, you do find moments of strange joy. Sledding on a piece of bark down an icy hill. Stealing an extra dried berry from the pantry when no one is looking. Learning how to whistle through your teeth and confusing the dog. Watching snowflakes land on your sleeve and imagining what the world looks like beyond the forest, past the wolves, over the Urals. And you cling to stories, tales whispered by grandmothers of forest spirits with mossy beards and wicked eyes, of frost demons who tap on windows, and foxes who speak in riddles, of saints, witches, and talking bones, of Baba Yaga and her walking hut, who, depending on the version, might eat you, save you, or make you clean her house with your eyelashes. You recite them in your head while stirring soup. You whisper them to your younger siblings in the dark. You keep them like treasures, warm against the chill. And then one day, you are no longer a child. There's no celebration, no rite of passage, no gentle transition. One day you are small and slightly in the way. Someone hands you an axe and tells you to cut down a tree before nightfall, or don't bother coming back. You will likely marry young. You will likely lose your own children young. You will learn not to mourn too loudly, for fear it attracts bad luck. You will work and bend and endure, and perhaps, if the sky is feeling merciful, live long enough to become the one telling those forest stories to a new little face, peeking out from behind a badly mended blanket. But for now, you're just a child. And the goats are out again. Let's be honest about the animal situation, shall we? In modern life, pets are often cherished fur babies. We name them after celebrities, dress them in seasonal sweaters, and spend more on their dental care than some countries spend on education. But in 17th century Siberia? Oh no. Here, the line between pet, pest, and possible dinner is drawn in the snow, and regularly trampled by goats. Let us begin with the most dependable creature in your frigid life, the dog. Not a French bulldog with an Instagram account, not a golden retriever with a monthly BarkBox subscription. No, you get a dog that's a terrifying blend of wolf, bear, and unresolved trauma. This animal was not bred for companionship, it was bred for survival. It has frost in its whiskers, a suspicious glare, and the kind of bark that sounds like an avalanche warning. You do not pet it. You negotiate with it. Its affection is measured in glances that don't end in bites. Still, it is yours. And in a place where the wind whispers threats and the darkness never truly sleeps, your dog is warmth, protection, and the only creature in your household not complaining about the potatoes. Next, the cat, or cats, plural, if you're especially infested. Because where there's grain, there are rats, and where there are rats, there are cats with jobs. These are not lap cats. They do not meow, they scream at ghosts. They sharpen their claws on the bones of your enemies. They may or may not have names, usually something like Stripey or Demon. You feed them scraps and in return they keep the vermin slightly afraid. Slightly. Because yes, the vermin always return. Let's talk about rats. Oh, the rats, big as rabbits, bold as saints, and very interested in your food stores, your bedding, and your face. You hear them at night, gnawing in the corners. You see their little claw marks in the soot by the hearth. You try to ignore the occasional flash of movement across your peripheral vision. Denial is a powerful survival tool. Mice are more subtle, but no less infuriating. They nest in your boots, your grain sacks, your underwear drawer. They chew through ropes and leave tiny gifts in your stew. If you're very unlucky, and you are, you might wake to find one nibbling your eyebrow, which it mistook for a sprouted seed in the dark. And let us not forget the fleas. Fleas are the true monarchs of Siberian domestic life. They rule over humans and animals alike, uniting the classes in shared suffering. You scratch, you bleed, you burn your clothes and boil your bedding, and still they return, jubilant, jumping, and always hungry. If you ever see someone dancing by the fire pit and think, how joyous, they are not celebrating. They are trying to shake fleas out of their pant legs without flashing the neighbors. Lice are just as loyal. They set up shop in your hair, your hat, your eyebrows, and occasionally your deepest thoughts. You will comb them out with a bone-toothed rake and consider it self-care. Now, chickens. Yes, chickens. The feathered overlords of your small holding. They are loud, aggressive, and prone to mysterious illnesses. They peck at anything shiny, including your nose ring if you're fashionable, or your sanity if you're not. Their eggs are valuable, which makes them more dangerous. They are both precious and prone to vanishing without explanation. You suspect the foxes. Foxes, clever little devils with eyes like secrets and teeth like justice. They haunt the edges of the settlement, stealing hens, mocking your traps, and occasionally just standing there in the snow like philosophical enigmas wrapped in fur. You will never catch a fox. You will try. You will fail. Pigs? If you have them, they're a mixed blessing. They're excellent garbage disposals, but also escape artists. They scream like children when startled, which is alarming at 3 a.m. in a place where screams usually mean wolves. And yes, there are wolves. Always wolves. Sometimes distant howls. Sometimes closer. Sometimes close enough to raise the hair on the back of your neck and make you reconsider your life choices. Occasionally, someone disappears. You'll say bears because it feels less personal. But deep down, you suspect the wolves. Oh, and speaking of bears, yes, they are real. No, they are not cuddly. No, they do not want your friendship, your leftovers, or your cozy fire. They want your livestock, your food stores, and possibly your femur. Do you fight them? You do not. You pray they go away. You hang dried fish as an offering. You hope the dog doesn't bark too loud. But sometimes you must share the land. You learn to read the signs. Bear tracks in the snow. A disturbed beehive. That faint scent of old fur and new danger. Sometimes you even see them from a distance. A great shaggy silhouette lumbering through the trees, steam rising from its breath like a ghost of old Russia. You freeze. It freezes. You both pretend the other doesn't exist. And the world continues, one frostbitten heartbeat at a time. And somewhere in the rafters, the angry goose watches it all. By now you may have noticed that Siberia is not a place of mild seasons. It doesn't do gentle transitions. There's no sweater weather here. No pumpkin spice fog curling around lampposts, no breezy spring afternoons where you idly consider rearranging the firewood. Siberia offers only two moods, frozen misery and slightly wetter frozen misery. Oh, and the occasional firestorm, just for contrast. Let's begin, of course, with winter, because it is always winter. Even in July, when other places are draped in sun-drenched idleness and bees hum lazily through lavender bushes, Siberia looks like it's waiting to be cast in a snow-themed apocalypse film. You wake to a world that is not just cold, but quietly hostile. It doesn't scream, it creaks. Like your joints, the air slices rather than soothes. It enters your nostrils like dry razors, crackling up into your sinuses and settling in with the enthusiasm of a bored poltergeist. Every breath you take is an insult. Your eyelashes frost together before you finish your morning blink. And your urine? Yes, it freezes. Midstream. Don't ask how you know. Just know that you do. You wear every layer you own, and still, the wind finds you. It sneaks past your animal hide tunic, slips through the seams of your felt boots, and whispers ancient threats into your ears like a passive-aggressive ghost. Your nose turns the color of old tomatoes. Your fingers become uncooperative sausages. You begin to suspect that you too are made of ice, just pretending to be flesh. Frostbite is not some dramatic Hollywood disaster. It's a slow negotiation between your body and the void. First comes numbness, then itching, then pain, then nothing, which is worse, because that means you've lost the argument. Toes go first, followed by fingertips, then noses. Ears are a delicacy for frost. And if you think wearing a hat solves that, congratulations, you've invented a false sense of security. Now and then a snowstorm rolls in, like nature's way of shaking the etch-a-sketch and starting over. The world vanishes into swirling white. You lose the path. You lose your bearings. You lose your will to ask why you're outside at all. The snow isn't soft. Not like fairy tales promise. It's heavy, wet, sharp. It clings to your fur cloak like guilt. And when it melts, it seeps into every seam, every fold, until you are less a person and more a sponge in boots. Then the thaw. You'd think spring would be salvation. But in Siberia, spring is just winter with boundary issues. The ice turns to slush. The rivers, previously frozen solid, now crack like cannon fire and begin to heave open, vomiting chunks of ancient ice and the occasional unlucky mammoth bone. The mud comes next. Mud with opinions. Mud that swallows boots and dignity. Mud that seems to whisper, you chose this. You lose entire afternoons trying to rescue a cartwheel from the sludge, only to realize that time itself is stuck here, sunken into the brown. Then the bugs arrive. The ones that waited. The ones that breed in puddles and feast on regret. Mosquitoes the size of ambition. Midges so numerous they blot out the sun. And something that might be a fly, but you're pretty sure it's evolved to feed on blood and dreams. You slap, you swat, you curse, and eventually you stop fighting. Because in Siberia, surrender isn't failure, it's strategy. Summer, such as it is, arrives with a sarcastic grin. It's warmer, yes, but also wetter, and the air grows thick with a humidity that feels personal. You sweat through your tunic, which never fully dries. Mold forms in places you didn't know could mold. You develop a suspicious rash. You name it Greg. The skies change tone, from bright white to bruised gray. Thunder rumbles across the horizon like a drunken Cossack, and lightning dances across the treetops. Fires are not uncommon. You rush to smother sparks with dirt, wool, or the desperate hope of someone who cannot afford to lose a third outbuilding. And when the wind comes, oh, the wind. It doesn't blow. It accuses. It rattles your shutters like an angry tax collector. It lifts the thatch from your roof and hurls it toward the forest like a warning. Sometimes it brings messages. The sound of distant wolves, the wail of a lost soul, or the quiet taunting of your neighbor's cow, who's somehow always warmer than you. Then, just as you begin to forget the taste of sunlight, the frost returns. It arrives one morning, subtle as a betrayal. A shimmer on the bucket's rim, a chill beneath the door. A single frozen tear on the corner of your dog's eye. You sigh, you layer up, you light the fire, and winter begins again. A cycle of suffering, seasonal despair, and the stubborn refusal to die. Weather in Siberia isn't a backdrop, it's a protagonist. A moody, dramatic diva that demands your attention, your toes, and occasionally your soul. But on some nights, just some, the sky clears. The stars appear. The frost glitters like spilled diamonds on the ground. The air is so still, so sharp, that it rings in your ears. And for one frozen heartbeat, you think maybe, just maybe, it's beautiful. Then your teeth start chattering, and you realize your tongue is stuck to your mustache. Night falls like a tired apology. The sun, already stingy with its presence, slips away behind the tree line with the enthusiasm of someone excusing themselves from an unpleasant dinner. The sky turns bruised purple, the kind of color that reminds you you're mortal, and always one poor decision away from being buried beneath it. Your breath fogs the air like a ghost trying to make conversation. The wind stills, not because it's kind, but because it's waiting. And the forest begins to whisper again. But let's back up. You made it through the day, technically. You're still breathing, still upright, and only mildly frostbitten. You've hauled pelts, reset traps, maybe frightened away a hungry bear with shouting, fire, or tears. You deserve something. What you get is rot. The hut smells worse now than it did in the morning, and that's saying something. The reek of damp animal skins, old sweat, boiled roots, and slowly dying dreams clings to the air like a tax. You light your tallow candle, which smokes in protest. The flame is dim, and the smell? Like burnt hair mixed with expired hope. You sit by the fire, your joints aching like a prophecy. The floor creaks, the walls sigh, and the silence returns, not peaceful but charged. Like even the mice are holding their breath. And so you eat. Dinner is, let's call it soup. It's more of a suggestion, really. Something was boiled. You're not sure what. The taste is salt, soot, and something vaguely fungal. You chew it anyway, because hunger doesn't care about palatability. It only cares about obedience. The candle flickers again. You burp something ominous, and then you remember that lump on your back. Ah yes, your friendly neighborhood abscess. It started last week. A tender little knot between your shoulder blades, pulsing like it had opinions. Now it's warm to the touch. Angry. You name it because you need companionship. Lumpy. Lumpy is loyal. He never leaves. He might be full of infection, or possibly teeth. Who knows? You could lance it. You've seen others do it. With a hot knife, a dull needle, or if they're feeling ambitious, a rusty nail. There's even a local belief that placing a silver coin beneath your tongue while slicing it open keeps away the vapors. You do not have silver, so you don't touch it. You whisper a prayer to whatever deity specializes in pus and hope for the best. And then, you remember death. It's everywhere, not loudly, but intimately. You've seen men fall from frostbitten trees while resetting traps. You've watched a neighbor get mauled by a bear and, more disturbingly, survive only to succumb days later when his wounds attracted flies inside his body. There are no clean deaths here. No peaceful drift into sleep surrounded by loved ones. You die cold, in pieces, or with a surprising amount of fungal drama. Tuberculosis, you say? Oh yes, that slow, rasping, wet farewell. It starts with a cough and ends with a blood-speckled farewell speech that no one asked for. Dysentery? Absolutely. Explosive, humiliating, and usually fatal. A hole in the ground becomes your final confessional booth. And scurvy, not just for sailors. You've seen gums turn black, teeth drop like leaves in autumn. Old trappers have breath that could fell a yak. You don't dare ask when they last saw a vegetable. Funerals? Well, you're the funeral. There's no priest here, no ornate casket, no embalming. Just you, a shovel, and the rapidly freezing dirt. If you're lucky, someone marks your grave with antlers or a rock. If not, well, you become part of the forest. Literally. Bears are very thorough, and if you die in winter, they bury you in the spring. Until then, you're stored. Yes, stored. Tucked in a shed or placed under snow, wrapped in furs like the world's worst Christmas present. It's practical, horrifying, but practical. The locals aren't afraid of death. They're used to it. They treat it like weather, inevitable, occasionally violent, and best faced with layered clothing and low expectations. So you settle into bed, which is generous. It's a pile of animal hides and regret. The fire has gone out. You hear it breathing its last in tiny snaps and hisses. Outside, something howls, or maybe it's the wind. Or maybe it's that one fox who screams like a possessed toddler, always around midnight. Nature's alarm system. You close your eyes, but you don't sleep. Not really. You hover in a state of semi-conscious dread, one ear listening for footsteps, one hand clutched around the handle of your knife. Just in case. The cold wraps around you like a shroud. You think about your abscess. You wonder how long until you can trade enough pelts for a pair of real boots. You think about that one time you hallucinated a conversation with a birch tree, and honestly, it made some good points. And as your mind drifts, you realize you're still alive, still here, still suffering, still part of the strange, brutal rhythm of this frozen world. Not because you're strong, but because nothing has gotten around to killing you yet. And that, in Siberia, is victory. So sleep, little trapper, sleep while your fingers still work, while the rats are quiet, while the snow hasn't collapsed your roof. Tomorrow you wake up and do it all again, or you don't. Either way, good night. And remember, it could always be worse. You could be here for real.